I'd like to welcome everybody to the session on the 14th of November. In this series, which is being held to celebrate the centenary of the Baha'i faith in Australia, this is the fourth that looks at Persian Baha'is in Australia. We had two that looked at the period before the Islamic Revolution, 1979, and that looked at some stories of Persian Baha'is who arrived from the 1950s through to the 1970s. Now, last week and this week, we are listening to some Persian Baha'is who arrived after the revolution. And I've said several times that these are only a few, so many more to tell. And I recognize how many people have very interesting stories that are necessary to tell. And in time, they will be told in sessions like this or others. I think it's very important for these stories to be recorded, not only for those friends' own families and children and grandchildren, but for the world at large to see what the Persian friends have experienced and endured in service of their faith. We'll bring that down to the current session, which is being given by Aladdin Jamali and Elham Jamali and Katayoun Hassall. Now, we have known Aladdin and Elham for perhaps 3 decades since they arrived in Australia. And having arrived in Australia, they settled and raised a family and chose to live in a Victorian countryside. I'm going to hand to Aladdin and Elham to tell their story. So welcome, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you very much, Graham, and thank you for the kind invitation. I am so privileged and honored really to be part of this series, and how lovely to see so many of dear friends here in tonight's audience, and that I have the pleasure of knowing them. I thought that I think it would be a little bit, good if I give you a little bit of background, a bit of historical, perspective to the circumstances that led my journey to Australia, to this beautiful country that today I call it home, and I love it very much. So I'll give you a little bit of background. So I thought a little bit of, connection between my earlier life, friends would have a better understanding of the situation, the circumstances and the challenges that myself went through that finally led me to this beautiful country in 1984. So just to start, as Graham said, Aladdin is my name, and I was born in 1959 in the month of Allah, which is during the fasting. Hence, my name is Aladdin. So, and what a privilege to be born on the 8th of March, which is also coinciding with International Women's Day. I've been born in a very small, remote, mountainous village, about 50 kilometers southwest of the city of Qom. And the village name is Karagan Jasp. I'm going to quickly share my screen, if you don't mind, and if I can play a little bit with the technology, just to show you one page from a website, and then I explain for you there. Zoom, sharing my screen, and that's the one. Can you, dear friends, see this page? Can everyone see the page?
It's coming up, Aladdin. It's just time.
Right. So I just wanted you to get familiar with the name, Jasp, Karagan Jasp. Karagan is a village, and Jasp is an area 50 kilometers southwest of the city of Qom. And this is from a site which is called in Persian, sharing another few pictures. I'm not very good in technological things here. So this is the area of Jasp, which is 50 kilometers south of the city of Qom. Now, Jasp is in a valley about 12 kilometers wide. There are 7 villages in this area, friends. As you can see, a very mountainous, beautiful area there. Really a natural beauty, natural paradise. But when it comes to the inhabitants of those areas, of course, there is a different story. So the daily traveling and commuting to these 7 villages are generally from southwest, which people coming from the city of Qom, entering into this area and going, and our village is the very last one, to the northeast. to the northeast. Now, so that is the last village. But if you decide to come from the northeast of this area, from the northeast, the village, our village will be the first village that you will be entering into. But in the last 18 years that I used to live there, no one could travel because it's a very harsh terrain. The cars definitely cannot move. It is only on foot or horseback. So people can come from northeast direction. And that is exactly the route that Mullah Hussein took in 1949 when he was traveling from Shiraz to Tehran to meet Baha'u'llah. So he went through the cities of Isfahan, Kashan, Naraq, which is right behind those hills, where Councillor Naraqi comes from. Many of you are familiar with him, God bless his soul. And then Mullah Hussein entered into this village in 1849. Good. So the Naraq is just behind those hills, and you can see the houses. This is the city, the city of Krogan. Now, Mullah Hussein stays in that village for 6 days. For 6 days, and call all the learned of that particular village. And the reason he came through there, because the majority of the inhabitants of that village were Sayyid, from descendant of Muhammad and Imam Hussein. So he asked the learned of the village to gather together and ask other people from other 6 villages to also gather. So for 6 days and nights, Mullah Hussein was there, and majority of the people was from the Krogan, this particular village, and not from the other villages. In that 6 nights, more than half of the village population accepted the message of the Bab. And then Mullah Hussein, after 6 days, he continued his journey through those tracks, going within those mountains without going to other villages to the city of Qom, and then with the intention of going to Tehran. So of that almost 165, the history talks about it, 165 who accepted the message of the Bab. The first person who accepted Baha'u'llah was Mullah Ja'far Jaspi, from a very renowned family of Naraq. So he accepted the faith of Baha'u'llah, which later on in 1866, when he was forced to go to Tehran and do mosque and recant, unfortunately he was martyred, and he was the first martyr of Jasp, and his fate was like Tahir Qulatul Ain, who they threw his body into the well. Following that, about 30 families accepted the faith until the time of Abdul Baha, 30 families, hence the name of that website, 30 or Siyarun, or 30 companions. So 30 families accepted the faith of Baha'u'llah during the time of Abdul Baha. And it was during the time of Abdul Baha that the first local assembly of Krogan Jasp was formed, and Abdul Baha wrote a number of tablets, and in those tablets, he has mentioned 30 of the families. And you guys, friends, many of you would have probably come with the names of people like Rouhanis, Sadiqis, Nasiris, Ismailis, Alais, Jamalis, Mahbubis. All of these, many of them in New South Wales, in Victoria, will be familiar with this name, highly likely that they are actually coming from Jasp. Now, the story of the Baha'is of Jasp, dear friends, has been the story of hardship, heartbreak, persecution, denigration, desecration, and everything that you can call. I am very privileged to have a brother who is very passionate about the history of the faith in general and the history of the Baha'is of Jasp in particular. Now, he has written 4 volumes with the help of so many other dedicated Baha'is, 4 volumes of books, including that website, which is the ocean of information about the history of Jasp. And the first volume has been written by my father. You can see that is the one, which is about 500 pages. So about 2,000 pages of the history. And you can see the hat on his head. And that is the reason I have put in hat in his memory and his dedication, the way he brought us ultimately to this country. I will go through that for you a little bit later. Now, when you read the history of the faith in Jasp, you will find and you will see that there was a little bit of relaxation during mid-1940s to mid-1950s. And the reason was, that was the time, if you remember, Khomeini was exiled to Iraq until 1950, and then the government could have a little bit hold of the situation until 1955, when Mullah Taqi Falsafi went, the uprising of the ulamas. He went to national television and radio and instigated the whole of Iran really against the Baha'is. And as many of you remember, that was the time when the Mashriq al-Askar of Tehran was destroyed. And then that also caused the influx of the ulamas and mullahs to the village of Karagan-e-Jas because of its proximity to city of Qom. Now, every Thursday and Friday, these mullahs used to come, instigate the Baha'is. The mosque was attached to the house of my father, and he was always abusing and accusing the Baha'is, in particular my father as a leader of the Baha'is, because he was the chairman of the LSA of Karagan. He was also the teacher of the children classes. And the impact of that was the next day, we were all subject to bullying, abuse by children, you know, until the next week, that again, another few of these ulamas coming and instigating the inhabitant of the village for, you know, for another week. So that was the situation, friends. And what happened, so every day outside, we were abused, we were bullied, through the instigation of the parents of these children. And even when we were going to the school, I do remember that my poor mother and the mother of many of the Baha'i children, you know, they used to make sure that we are so neat and clean that when we go to school, there will be no excuses for the teacher to chastise us and punish us because we may be a little bit of dirty here and there. So we used to go in the cold of the winter, 2 or 3 meters of snow, and the teacher lined the children up, all of them, Muslims and Baha'is, and look at their hands and their collars to make sure there is no dirt. And naturally, they, because of the children, of course, they could maybe find a little bit of dirt under our skin or under our nails or here and there. And that was the cause to bring us in front of the class, and we open our arms and with those wet stick in the middle of winter punish us. And I do recall and remember many times that my brother and many of the other Baha'i children sitting in the class and looking at me and crying while I was beaten up, or they were beaten up and we were sitting and crying. And that was the situation of purely on the instigation of the mullahs coming from the city of Qom. And when we were going back home and telling our father, you know, that yes, this situation, this happened to us, all he could say was this in Persian, Zahr dahan shahr dahid, zakh zanan marham nahid. And in English, I have just made a sort of a translation of that, which it says, if they poison your life, sweeten their souls. If they inflict a wound upon you, be a balm to their souls. So that was his saying, not only to me, to all the children of the Baha'is. The only good time, happy time that we really, dear friends, had in those days, we were just looking for some Baha'i celebration, the 19-day feast that we used to go, and we would have so much enjoyed that. And my father used to say that they don't know what they are doing, we have to be nice. So you could see the true force of spirituality, the situation that we as Baha'i children were brought up, and really the true force of evil. For that many years that I was there, and for almost 130 years, the adult went through the same process. When I read the history, I can now see that every page, every line, every chapter of this book talks about the suffering, the hardship of the Baha'is of Karagan-e-Jas. Now, as I said, Mullah Ja'far Jaspi, the first who was martyred, and then following that, there was about 8 Baha'is who were martyred who were officially written in the history that they were martyred in the last 130 years. 2 of whom you guys, most of you would remember, Mr. Parviz Vojdani and Parviz Sadiqi, who were martyred in the island of Mindanao in Philippines. So they were also from those, the village of Karagan-e-Jas, which is this one. My reflection when I read the history, I can see that the Baha'is of this small remote village, they had 2 unique characteristics. One, they had the love of Baha'u'llah in their hearts. Second, They had the quality of insight. They knew that for 130 years or so, they suffered. They suffered at the hands of enemies and those who did not know what they are doing. So what they did during my time, they said, well, for 130 years we have suffered. We don't want the next generation of kids to go through the same process. So what they were doing, all of the Baha'is there, they used to, as soon as they finished their primary school, send them to Tehran and making sure that they will be educated. They go to the high schools and ultimately finding a job to be a service to the community, go to the university, and at least they will not be under persecution. So as soon as my sibling of 7, which I am the youngest of the 7, and one of them, of course, died in the young age because of the lack of facilities, health facilities. So I was the last one to go to Tehran because I was the youngest one. And as my brothers, finished their year 12, they had to go for 2 years of army. So I was the last to go. And life in Tehran, of course, was not also very simple because my father, because of his financial restraint, they couldn't support us well. So my brothers and sisters were working hard at night shift and day shift for us to be educated and finish our study. So in Tehran, even in one of the schools, which I still remember like yesterday, there was one teacher who it was his daily ritual, coming, me and my cousin in the same class, coming to the class, and before he started anything, starting with abusing and accusing the Baha'is of being the agent of Israel, and he used to put his fist like that and always open for the children and say, these are the Baha'is, there are nothing, there is nothing there. It is just, they are just dirty, they are unclean, and they are the agent of Israel. So these were the situation. So we continue our studies until about 1975, where through the encouragement of an institution in Tehran and through the encouragement of one of the auxiliary board member, Mr. Masih Farhangi, most of you know that beloved soul, who was arrested in 1980 and executed in 1981. They encouraged us to move to a pioneering post in the outskirts of Tehran, a place called Esfandiar Khani, to form the assembly of that locality. So all of us moved there. And while we were there, and because my brother, who I spoke about him earlier, he already finished his compulsory 2-year service in the army, he was encouraged by the same auxiliary board member to go to Bangladesh for pioneering. So he went to Bangladesh, and that was a blessing in disguise when he went to Bangladesh. And I'll tell you about that, why it was a blessing in disguise. Anyway, we continue to be there and do our studies until we finish year 12. When I finished year 12, we also could, through the support of an institution, to purchase a land to build a Baha'i center in that village, in that area, which was finally built and confiscated by the revolutionaries after the revolution. So my brother went there and we finished year 12. Now it is the time for to go to the 2 years of army service, because that was compulsory as soon as you finish your year 12. My immediate older brother also finished with me because he deferred his studies for 2 years, so he finished with me. So we had to go to the 2 years compulsory service in 1978. And imagine if we would have gone there, the war with Iran and Iraq would have started in 1980, and there is no doubt we would not have come back alive. But luckily, through the confirmation of Baha'u'llah and anything else that you can imagine, the directive of the government changed around that time by saying that those who finish year 12, if they can get an admission from a foreign university and get a passport, they can leave the country without going to the 2-year compulsory service. And that was, I think, the intention of the government, to get rid of as many young people as possible, hoping that the revolution will not succeed. But those who actually left the country were Baha'is, Jews, Christian, and those who did not really support the revolution. So we immediately wrote to our brother in Bangladesh. So we had him there to send us admission to the university. So while he was sending the admission to us, we also secured a passport. The admission came, and then the revolution was getting worse and worse, and the situation was more, you could see it's very dangerous. People in that village that we were, we could see in their eyes that they are just waiting for the fall of the regime and do whatever harm they can to the Baha'is. So the passport was secured, the admission came, and then we were thinking, now how can we get our passport stamp? And then we were told by the same institution that When you go to the immigration office, there is a Baha'i lady there, go to her and ask her to stamp the passport. So next day we went to the immigration office, went upstairs, looked for the lady, found the lady, asked the lady, are you such and such? She said, yes. And I said, I am a Baha'i and this is my admission. Without looking at the admission, he opened the passport, he stamped the passport, and in 2 or 3 weeks' time, all of us were out of Iran. So we all went out of Iran in late December 1978, and we went to Bangladesh. And these are just some of the photos of some of the Baha'is of Krogan Jas. And you can see this person who was a trustee of Huquq Allah by the Guardian at the age of 95, is another martyr at the age of 95 for being a spy of Israel. He was arrested in 1980 and he was executed as well at the age of 95. So these are the situation, a little bit of history taking us out of Bangladesh. So I went to Bangladesh in 1978, December, and my brother, of course, secured a place for us at university hostel. And just immediately after a day, he took me to traveling teachings. In a Muslim country, very secular, beautiful country, freedom at last in Bangladesh. So we went teaching until the university opens, which was almost after 3 months. So after about a few weeks, I got sick, unfortunately. So for 3 months, I was in hospital. 3 months in hospital, and no one knew what is wrong with me. I was losing weight. Doctors after doctors, they did their best. Nurses after nurses, doctors after nurses. After 3 months, they all lost hope. And because they had a little bit of privilege, the government with the foreign students, they actually brought the private physicians or doctors of the President Ershad to see me at hospital. So these doctors came next day with about 20 doctors and nurses behind him. He came to my bed, he looked at me in about 10 seconds and he walked away. He walked away, and after 10 minutes, a nurse came with an injection, and he described that he put that injection to me, and the next day I was feeling better. And after almost a week, I was out of hospital. And that gave me a reflection of when Baha'u'llah says, when you are ill, seek the advice of competent physician. God bless his soul. I don't know what he did, what he thought, but that injection, since that injection in 1979, thanks Baha'u'llah, I have not been to a hospital since then for any major or minor problem. God bless his soul. So after 3 months of going and teaching and, to travel teaching in Bangladesh, the university opened. And because I really, really love to study medicine, I thought that I can be a good doctor, rather than the admission that my brother got me in agricultural science. I like to do, medical science. So we went to the University Medical College and we said to them that I want to study. They said, oh, you're most welcome. However, because there are a lot of competition, you have to bring a letter of reference from embassy. I said, that's fine, we can go and get it tomorrow. We went tomorrow to the embassy, and then the regime has changed, all the stuff changed. And the first question they asked me if I'm a Baha'i. I said, yes, I'm a Baha'i. And they said, sorry, we cannot give you this letter. We have to seek the advice of our foreign ministry in Iran. I said, thank you, your foreign ministry, and thank you for your assistance. And I just turned my back. And since then, I have not been to any Iranian embassy since 1979. And I went and continued with my studies in soil science or agricultural science. I better stop sharing this one. So, and then in Bangladesh, I think the culture of teaching was in such a way that travel teaching to villages and towns was a norm. So every week we had the opportunity and privilege to go to different cities and town and travel teach, and it was just beautiful. And we were very much inspired by the visit of the Hand of the Cause Muhajir and Councillor Afshin from India. So and there was a lot of hardship there because, again, my parents could not support us in Bangladesh, and we were under the auspices of the United Nations as refugees. So they recognized the Baha'is as refugees, and we were receiving benefits or some money to survive in Bangladesh until we finish our study. So it came to about after going through all of these things and finish my study in 1983 and 1984. So now we had to seek another alternative to go to another country. And again, blessing of Baha'u'llah and the institution there, it was during Fraser government, I think, that they recognized the Baha'is as refugees on the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. So as soon as that happens, we went to our National Assembly in Bangladesh, and through their blessing and love, they wrote to the National Assembly of Australia, whom I admire and I am indebted to them for the rest of my life. They sponsored us to come to Australia. And because we didn't have the money, of course, to pay the fare and all of that, the Catholic Church, on the understanding that they get the money back when we come to Australia, they paid for our fare, and the National Assembly sponsored us, and we could get our permanent residency in Australia, which the next chapter opened to us. We came to Australia in 1984. When we came to Australia, we were welcomed by Amin Sabit, Bahra's brother, who spoke last week, and he was so kind to us, and he showed us around. He showed every form of hospitality and kindness for about 2 weeks. And after 2 weeks, we secured a rental place in Kew, where the National Assembly asked us to consider settling there as pioneers, to either, I don't remember whether to reform the LSA of Kew or just to strengthen the LSA. But anyway, so we moved there. Jane McLaughlin, Sing Young Chu, Safar's family, they were in that community. And so we started the LSA, and we had our normal gatherings of, feast those days and deepening and firesides and, sometimes probably things like, fireside, that people coming and enjoying it. That was in 1984. And that was the time that really I was trying to settle in and learn really, in a way, another new language, because I had difficulties with the Australian accent at the time, of course, although in Bangladesh, I had to learn Bengali and English. But anyway, that was very helpful. So we settled in Kew, we formed the LSA, and then, so that continues until 1995. In 1995, I had the pleasure of being appointed as a member of a Turkish working group through the BRO at the time, I think, because there were some Turkish friends in Melbourne and some Turkish friends in Shepparton, and we used to visit them and go and chat and have a, talk with them, have a meal with them, and just keeping really in touch with those dear friends. That was some of the activities that I was doing it. In 1986, so that continues, that sort of activities until 1986, when I got married, of course, in 1986, and Elham, of course, which we'll talk after me. We married in 1986 and continued. So Elham became member of LSA of Kew, and then we continued with our normal activities. And in 1987, we had the first child, Elham Jamali. Some of you may know Elham. That was our first child. And in 1987, my brother, who was talking to, he married Whitehall Lee, a Malaysian Chinese, or Chinese Malaysian from Malaysia, but she was very fluent in Mandarin and Cantonese. And that opened the door in our house for the Chinese teaching, especially those who are coming from mainland China. So from 1987 to 1991, when they left for Africa, our house was almost the hub for Chinese activity, and quite a few of them, like Andrew Stranieri, Helen and Howard Perkin, lovely dear friends that I know and I admire, they helped in that process very much. So Chinese activity was one of the main one in that particular. 1988, we had our second child, and then in 1992, it was a holy year, and one of the big projects that we undertook, we letterboxed all of the household in Kew, inviting friends to come and seek about Baha'i faith and all of that. 1993, the amalgamation of all the council, of course, took place, where all the 219 municipalities became 79. So Kew, Camberwell, and Hawthorne became one, Boroondara. And at that time, we decided to move out of Melbourne and go to a pioneering post. So I applied for a few jobs. And in 1994, when we had our third child, Sana Jamali, I secured a job in Ballarat, and we moved to Ballarat. And you all know Ballarat was the second oldest assembly, homes to Effie Bakers and Kate Dwyer and Bill Johnsons and naming Childs and Andres and so many of these friends. But unfortunately, at that time, there was no LSA. The only family that I knew was Jeff and Ann Goodfellow. So for 3 months, the government secured me to stay in a pub while I'm settling in. And in that 3 months, almost every other night, Jeff and Anne would have shown me utmost hospitality every other night in their home, having meal and planning to form the LSA of Ballarat. And the story of the pub, which I really don't want to miss, is for 3 months in the pub, people coming for a meal, people are coming for a drink and karaoke and all of that. So every night that I was there having a meal with the patron of the pub, I was having a fireside without a break with all of these guys, with particular attention and emphasis on that they should not drink alcohol. They were just doing and having fun, and we had a very, very good relationship with these people. After 3 months, I left the pub, and the owner of the pub came and embraced me for almost 2-3 minutes, crying, and I could not believe my eyes that the lady who would have probably kicked me out because of the way I was behaving, you know, she's now really almost crying for 5 minutes. So that was a very good experience in that pub, where I got to know the true culture of Australian, how to deal with Australian, the language, you know, anything. You know, I almost became a true blue Aussie in a way in that pub. So after coming out, we secured a place, a big place, to make sure that we can have all the activities. So with the help of Anne and Jeff, we decided to see where the Baha'is are. We could find about 10 of them. Immediately wrote to National Assembly and formed the first assembly of Ballarat, and primarily because we wanted to have everything under the auspices of an LSA. So children classes started, about 10, 15 children, and then from that time we got engaged into a lot of activities, interfaith activities, multicultural, you know, media, relationship with local government, state government, that so much relationship and that I have established. That was really unbelievable. And I also had a lot of passion about country believers, where we used to go and visit country believers and visit them. And out of that, we started in small community conferences, which was very successful. Many people attended, and we visited many of those dear friends in different country areas. It was really, really blessing that we could never forget. So all of these activities, certainly we undertook. And then at the same time, I became member of the regional teaching committee for 7 years, so doing regional activities as well, until about 2001, where the community of Ballarat grew so much and became so good, you know, with encouragement of friends to come to Ballarat and even in different countries, that we thought, I think it's a time for us to move out. So in 2001, we moved a little bit further west to an area of Golden Plain Shire. We formed the LSA of Golden Plain Shire for a few years. And that was the year I also became the member of the Regional Baha'i Council. And the first meeting of the council, we were so blessed to have with Councillor Rayhani in our house to do all the planning. So settled in this city and having our activities, assisting the Ballarat community. And now that from the outset that I can see the changes that happened in the last many years in Ballarat and surrounding, really one of the best community that I can even imagine. So many beautiful souls who are dedicated to the faith, young and old, from 12 different nationalities, and undoubtedly and without exaggeration, one of the 10 top Baha'i communities in Ballarat when it comes to the question of core activities, relationship that they have with each other's love, and the diversity that they have, that I can just sit here and be proud that at least we could make some little contribution to that. And all I wanted to say that all of this journey, which is just a glimpse of that I have gone through, it has always and is only the blessing and confirmation of that first step of Mullah Hussein who took to that village, and the blessing and confirmation of all the institution and individual who had me particular attention to our my beloved National Assembly in Australia, who helped us to finally be there, without whom it would not have been possible. So dear friends, lastly to say, that yes, the enemies of the faith in that village for 130 years, they made every effort to quench the light of the faith in Krogan Jas and to uproot the 30 families from that village. In 1980, they succeeded in uprooting the 30 families, unaware that 30,000 Jaspis reared their head from the midmost ocean of Pacific, Atlantic, Indian Ocean, and those that I know of, serving the faith to the best of their ability with love and really fellowship and everything else. And that is the glimpse of my little story. Thank you so much for that. Sorry if I forgot something, but I talked too much. Very good of you. Thank you.
Aladdin, thank you so much. We could listen to you for a very much longer time. And thank you. But now we're going to hear from your other half, Elham. Welcome, Elham. We look forward to hearing from you.
Hello. Aloha, everyone. My story, I'll be brief about my story in Iran. But in December 19, just briefly, in December 1978 is when the mobs attacked the houses and shops of the believers in Shiraz and arsoned it. And over 200 houses and shops were arsoned by mob attacks. And that's when my father decided, although our house was safe, was not attacked, my father decided that it was time for us to leave. And that's when he quickly sold all his assets, his business and everything, and we left. We quickly left. We could do that by plane at that time. So April 1979, we could still leave Iran by plane. So we went to Spain and we waited in Spain for 2.5 years until we got our visa to come to Australia. And in November 1981, we arrived in Melbourne. My parents, we settled in Preston in Melbourne. My parents became members of LSA there, along with Trish and Farouk Sazegar and a few other Baha'is there. And then after a while, when I became 21, then I also became a member of LSA and taught children classes, etc. Then we married in 1986 and we moved to Ballarat. So I just wanted to read one of the writings of Shoghi Effendi on behalf of Shoghi Effendi, which was also cited by Universal House of Justice in 1981 about the Persian believers, which was an inspiration for us to leave Melbourne. He feels the Persians can render the utmost assistance to the teaching work wherever they settle, but they must go on the basis of pioneers and take up residence where they can render the best service to the cause of God. It does little good for the faith to have large groups of Persians settled in a city. The pioneers should be in minority and aid the natives to shoulder the responsibilities of the faith. So we decided to move to Ballarat at that time, which was the best decision we made. So now, can you go back first to that one?
Can you, dear friends, see the screen?
Yeah, I just wanted, can you see the screen?
Yes, we can, thank you, yes.
I just wanted to show you a few newspaper articles that I found interesting. This is the first National Baha'i Conference that I attended, 1983 in Mildura. And there were 400 Baha'is gathered there. And Collis Featherstone was the main speaker. And there was John Walker, you can see a picture of him there. And many newly arrived Persians attended that conference. So I thought that's an interesting article to have a look at. Now, before I explain about the articles, I wanted to say that from the beginning, we got involved in the life of the society in Ballarat. I became member of the school parents and friends and the school canteen. I volunteered there. I taught best classes for a few years at school. We became, not only us, but other members of Ballarat Baha'i community. We all got involved in multicultural organizations, interfaith groups, Aboriginal reconciliation groups, environmental groups, the police, and the list goes on. So we were involved in the life of the society in Ballarat. And this involvement of the Baha'is in the life of society, together with the rich Baha'i history, as you know, Effie Baker grew up in Ballarat, and she was the first Baha'i woman in Australia. So this combined with the rich Baha'i history gave rise to numerous publicity in newspapers, in the radio, on social media recently. And I couldn't possibly show you all, but a few of them I have chosen to show, which emphasizes the involvement of the Baha'is in the life of community. So this is in 2005, and my daughter, Elham Jamali, became Young Citizen of the Year in Ballarat. You can see her picture with her award. And then 2 years after that, 3 of our youth in Ballarat went to Haifa for a year of service, and they were interviewed by the paper, and then they were advertised as local heroes. On the right-hand side, you can see them pictured below: Jessica Goodfellow, Sabo Marvasti, and Elham Jamali. And it says, the people who really make our communities tick. So I'm really proud of our youth that were considered as people who make our communities tick. The next one, yeah, that's that publicity which was about Effie Baker and City's Baha'i Link. So you can see a big cover story in the paper, Faith in the Stars, because Effie Baker's grandfather was the first superintendent of Ballarat Observatory, and he invented the telescope, which is still there and is in use, and it's called the Baker, as you can see there with my daughter beside it. So that was that history of the observatory, and the Baha'i history of Effie Baker being the first Baha'i woman gave rise to this article, which was excellent. Then this article is again about the involvement of my mother in a multicultural women's group, and how her story of persecution, along with a few other refugee women, was the basis of this dance group, which was choreographed and danced by non-Baha'is, but the stories of my mother and a few other refugee women was actually audioed while the dance was being performed in Ballarat, and many people went and saw that, and this is the cover story in the paper about my mother, her family, and the dance group. This is another cover story in Ballarat newspaper in 2017 for the birth of 200th anniversary of the birth of Baha'u'llah. You can see Kevin picture there, a long-standing Baha'i in Ballarat. And the article is about his story of how he declared his faith to Baha'u'llah. And then on the right-hand side, you can see the members of the Ballarat community and the junior youth group on top. And one of the non-Baha'i performers who actually performed at the concert. The concert that was one of the celebrations that happened for the birth of Baha'u'llah in Ballarat. The concert included all non-Baha'i performers who put to music and dance the writings of Baha'u'llah. That was a very, very successful concert attended by many people. And this was just recently for the 100th anniversary of the coming of the Baha'i faith to Ballarat, where Ballarat LSA commissioned a virtual soul choir that, two musicians put together. And there were over 80 voices there, majority non-Baha'is, who sang the writings of Baha'u'llah. And there were numerous articles as a result of that virtual soul project. I've only put three of them here, but there was an interview on the radio and on social media and everywhere. And it was also, the virtual soul choir was also shown at the parliamentary reception in Canberra earlier this week. So that's another thing that Ballarat Baha'i community is proud of. So that's about it, about the articles. There is also a book that was published in Ballarat. It's a recipe book. It takes courage, and it's the story of refugee women, and it includes 3 Baha'i women in Ballarat that are in this group. And their stories and their recipes is in the book as well. And that was also a great thing, I think, Ballarat Baha'i community. Thank you.
Elham, thank you so much for that story about your engagement in Ballarat. And I just wonder whether we have some of the other Ballarat Baha'is online who can add a little to the Jamali story. Let's hear from others to see what they've left out, what they really do while they're in Ballarat. So to anybody else who's in that community to come online and share some of their stories about this wonderful family.
About
yes,
the Jamalis in Ballarat. I just got the iPad happening. Lots of things to say about the Jamalis. They revived, the second oldest, the oldest Baha'i community, LSA community outside of a capital city in Australia. When it went through a troubled time, the Jamalis came and did their stuff. The first hidden word is what always comes to mind when I think of the Jamalis: pure, kindly and radiant hearts. Everybody in their family, every member of their family, uncles, aunts, grandparents, children, grandchildren, they have it. And obviously it was nice to hear that rich history, that Mullah Hussein touched them and was, that they're living that heritage. Great stuff, great story. Thank you, Jamali. Thanks, Graham, for hosting this and doing this. It's great service. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Kevin. Thank you. Andrew Straneri, your name was mentioned there. Do you have anything to add?
I do, and thanks for a great talk, Aladdin and Elham, and it brought back so many memories. And I just can't speak more highly of the heart that I found in the Ballarat community, and that amongst all the members, and it's just make it a privilege to have been here over the last couple of decades. But I'd like to tell a little story, if I could, about a Ruhi class that Aladdin ran, and it was in the home of a friend who was wheelchair bound. So Aladdin had to drive 45 minutes to get to it. And on one day, and there was just the 3 of us, and often we would end up talking about football as much as the Rui book, because for some reason Aladdin had converted to the Saints football team. That's something I would like to find out how that happened one day. And Marek was a Collingwood supporter and I was a Cat supporter. But on this particular day it was raining very heavily. And when we finished the Rui, which may have been an hour and a half or something, we went out and drove down the road to find that the creek had flooded. So we couldn't go back into the town. And being sort of enterprising, we thought, oh, well, we can go through the bush tracks around the lake and get around that way. And as we were driving, it was very heavy and the road was very slippery, but we kept going until we reached a cascade of water that blocked the road. So we turned round to go back, wondering what we would do then. But no sooner had we travelled a couple of 100 metres when a tree had come down on the road, blocking us in. So we couldn't go forward, we couldn't go back. And it was raining very heavily. So we sat in the car, pleasantly talking about things until we thought, my goodness, what are we doing? Another tree might actually come down on top of us. We should get out of the car at least. And so we did, and then slowly started walking back all the way back into the town, and the town had flooded quite badly that day, and we had to leave the car stranded there for quite a few days and stuff. But it was, if there was anybody I was delighted to be stranded with, it was
Well, thanks, Andrew, for that story. I was wondering where that story was going to go. It didn't go anywhere. We've got maybe just one or 2 minutes if we've got any other friends online. Yes.
Yeah, I'd love to say something, Graham.
Oh, lovely to see you. So over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll be brief, but can I just say, yeah, when Aladdin came to Ballarat, can I say that he was a godsend, that it was just so uplifting, so heartfelt, and so encouraging to have him come when he did. It was, he was really needed at that time. So the assembly had fallen. So when Aladdin came, we were able to then re-establish when Elham came to join in, because he came before her. We were able to then get it up and running again. So, yep, just thank them both for being here for that time.
You're very kind, and you're very kind, Jeff, and thank you.
Pleasure.
Very kind.
I think the Goodfellows have their own story to tell about their time in Ballarat. That must be
Yes.
the future.
It'd be pretty boring after that.
We've got time maybe for 1 or 2 questions for Aladdin and Elham before we move to our second speaker.
This is a question that I had last week as well, and it's for the Persians that spoke on the sessions. As you know, I'm Persian as well, and I'm wondering whether they have Muslim family relatives, and what is their attitude towards the faith now, because I know that myself, I've lost my...
Go ahead, we can see you and we can hear you.
Oh, okay. I thought I've lost it. So I'm wondering whether the attitude, what's the attitude of their Muslim relatives, and what type of relationship they have now after 40 years of revolution with those relatives.
Thank you, Anis John, for that question, and so lovely to see you. Thank you for asking that question. A very, very good question. Most of the suffering of my father was through his old relatives. So he was the only son of his father, of course, with his parents, and his father was Muslim, and all of the relationship of my father were Muslim. And when my father decided to marry my mom, who was from a Baha'i family, the whole enmity and torture and persecution started actually primarily from the family of my own father, who were really putting hands together with the rest of the village people and trying to, not only my father, who actually the place that he used to live, he couldn't live there anymore. He had to move on to one of my uncle's house further north. And they had suffering and suffering and suffering. And even when they got married, their honeymoon with 2 other couples, actually they went to Qom in the prison for 1 week, simply because they had a Baha'i marriage, primarily through the instigation of his own relative, his own uncle and cousins and all of that. But these days I'm hearing that now they have come to some understanding of regret, that what they have done in the past 40 years, 50 years. But of course, you know, the Baha'is, we forgive them and we love them, and some of our relation are in touch with them. But most of the enmity was through them, through the relation of my own father.
That's very interesting. And Elham, do you have an answer to that question as well?
No, I don't have any Muslim relatives that I can look back. But there was someone has their hand up.
Sorry, Graham.
Go ahead, Max, or Kurush. Max is going to speak.
Yeah. All I want to do is ask Aladdin a question. Aladdin, do you still have the magic lamp?
Sitting next to me. Thank you so much. You're very kind. Yeah. So every time people ask, Elham is my magic lamp.
Wonderful question and wonderful answer. So perfect. Kurush, did you have something to say? Because I saw your face pop up there.
Yeah, I was just going to say, well, not all of the Baha'is come from the Muslim background. Like our family came from Zoroastrian background, and there is a different story that goes with with my family. So if you want to hear that, it's going to take a while. And I think when my master talked about it, it's actually very closely related to his.
Other presenters would be nice.
Well, thank you very much. I want to thank Aladdin and Elham for that wonderful presentation. And I want to move to our second, maybe third speaker for the evening, and that's Katayoun Hassall. We're very keen to hear Katty's presentation, and she's coming to us from another room in my own house. Katty, there, welcome. We look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Graham, and thank you everyone for being here. These talks on this series have been so inspirational, and especially tonight to hear Aladdin and Elham's story. It's amazing. I really don't have a story as inspirational as that, but nevertheless, I thank Graham for giving me this opportunity to share my very ordinary story. I thought it was important to do that in a way, or at least Graham thought, that's why he asked me. It's because I became a Baha'i in Australia, in Sydney. It was about a year after my mother, sister, and I migrated to Australia. We came in March 1984. And that time it was during the Iran-Iraq war. And for a short period of time, the borders opened and we were able to leave. My father, unfortunately, Mr. Shakur Sefi, he was a former army colonel, I don't know how to say it, colonel. That's right, colonel. I have to think of the Kentucky. He was a former army colonel, and he did not have permission to leave the country. So we came, and he joined us a few years later. My maternal grandparents, Mr. and Mrs. Shirley, they had moved to US before the Iranian Revolution. And by the time borders opened and we were able to get permission to leave, they had moved to Australia. So they sponsored us and we were able to migrate to Australia. I was the first in my immediate family to become a Baha'i. My youngest sister soon followed. My mother, Shaheen, became a Baha'i a few years later. And she actually fell in love with Baha'u'llah. She knew about the faith before, but she fell in love with Baha'u'llah during a temple service. My dad, after managing to come to Australia, started his own investigation, and he was supported by wonderful Persian Baha'is in Gosford, Central Coast, and he became a Baha'i as well. The 1979 revolution, as we've heard, changed things for everyone. I was in middle school at the time, and we were living in Kerman, very small, they used to call it calm town. It was very calm compared to other places. My dad was a second in command at an army base there. The first impact of the revolution on my family was that both of my parents were asked to take early retirement. Asked is saying it politely. And so that meant that we moved to Tehran. It was not a large price to pay, and we were grateful because my father was not executed. In other parts, not calm towns, but other towns and cities, many of the officers who were the same rank as my dad were executed as part of this purging that happens during all revolutions. What was difficult was that we lost the country we had known. We now lived with uncertainty and fear. The authorities gave Dad a hard time. They accused him of being a Baha'i, which he was not. In Tehran, we were living in my grandparents' home in Tehran, who were accused of being Baha'is, which they were. On one occasion, we got word that our house was just about to be searched, and we all went into panic mode, packing up and emptying the house of alcohol, music, and books. One day on my way from school, I was stopped and questioned by a pastor who searched my bag. I often bought banned books on the black market and would be carrying it back home in my bag. And it was just very lucky that I didn't have any book other than school books that day. When I was asked if I carried weapons, I answered, no, I've just cut my nails. My mother gave me a very hard time about my cheeky answer because I did not take this threat seriously enough. So my poor mom was in constant fear of her daughters being picked up and then never hear from them again. So they wanted a better opportunity for us and a safer environment. And so they decided to migrate to Australia. We left with one suitcase each. So let me backtrack a little bit. I grew up in a secular household, but from a Muslim background. My parents were not particularly religious, but both had very close relatives who had become Baha'is. The faith has had a very big influence on my life, long before I actually signed a declaration card. My mother's father, his mother was called Keshwar Mutahede. She was a Baha'i from a Jewish background. My grandfather grew up as a Baha'i, but he left the faith when he fell in love and married my grandmother, who was a very staunch Muslim. He later rejoined the Baha'i faith when he was living in the United States. My grandmother, Esmat Shoghi, was not impressed when she found that she had married a Baha'i. She eventually became a Baha'i in 1960s, but not through her husband's family, through my father's instead. 3 of my father's brothers had become Baha'is. One brother was married to my grandmother's best friend from school, who introduced my dad to my mother's family as a potential groom. Basically, I literally owe my very existence to that Baha'i uncle. Another brother converted my maternal grandmother, who was a very great spiritual influence on me. She was asked not to talk about the faith as we grew up by my dad. And I think he had mostly safety reasons in mind. I learned about God, about the devotion my grandmother had to God and her love for God. And also indirectly, I learned about the faith from her when I walked in on her as she was saying her obligatory prayers, and to my great surprise, sang hijab. The third brother had a son-in-law, Dr. Sirus Roshani. He was a member of the NSA of Iran when I met him. And he was hiding and moving from one place to another in various disguises. Different hats, different mustache. He used to hide sometimes in our house. And he held many conversations of significance with me about justice and equality, harmony of science and religion. These were issues that as a young person reading various political motivated books I was interested in. He never mentioned the faith to me. But I believe that at the age of 15, my worldview was formed indirectly by the Baha'i teachings. But his true gift was given to me after he was martyred. One night I saw him in a dream, and I can still see the dream. He offered me some cookies. I took one knowing that I was taking something more than just a cookie. When I woke up, I said to myself, I will be a Baha'i one day. I'm sorry, I wasn't expecting to get emotional. After he was executed, after his martyrdom, I did try to learn more about the Baha'i faith, but it wasn't easy. Soon I gave up, and like a typical heedless teenager, I forgot all about the faith. Not until we moved to Australia, where I had access to books and talks and a Baha'i community. In Australia, we were welcomed by my granddad's community in Balcombe Hills. At the time, they were all Persian except one. The Forghanis and Safa Jews were the first families I met, and you wouldn't want a better welcoming party than them. The Safa Jews used to take me to the temple, and the Forghanis took me to Yaramul Baha'i School, where Mr. Forghani gave talks. I fell in love with both places, and for the next few years, I went back to Yaramul every summer to help in the kitchen. The Australian Baha'i community was my first silent teacher. Every non-Persian Australian believer I met, before I signed and even after I signed, only confirmed my faith, as it showed me the universal effect of Baha'u'llah, and taught me that the Baha'i faith is not just an offshoot of Islam or an Iranian religion, something that growing in Iran, I thought it might be the case. But I learned through the Australian community that it's an independent world religion. When we first came, those early days, I was very busy with language classes. For the first 2 months, I went to classes, intensive language classes. Then I joined year 11 in the middle of the year. By the way, I met two Baha'is, the Akbaris, Yegane and Farzan, during the language classes. So my English was gradually getting better. I was getting help from school as well. And I started to read Granddad's copies of Thief in the Night and Baha'u'llah and the New Era. That was enough for me. As a Muslim, I believed in the Bible, and that was enough. I began to really understand the progressive revelation, and that was the key for me. One day after a discussion on Thief of the Night, my grandfather telephoned Mr. Bahir Forghani, who was the chair of the LSA of Balcombe Hills at the time. Granddad asked him to come straight away. Katie wants to sign the card. I was really surprised, and I was amused because I know my granddad's ways. And I was annoyed as well because I hadn't expressed such a wish. I signed the card anyway that day. It was either that or create a scene because Mr. Forghani did show up. I really didn't mind. I thought I might as well sign, as I do believe in Baha'u'llah, and one cannot sit on the fence. You either believe or not. You've got to do something about it. And I think as a Muslim, I was used to not doing anything about my belief because I did believe in God, I believed in Muhammad, but I wasn't really a Muslim. So I owe my current happy situation to my maternal grandmother's nurturing of the sacred in my heart, Dr. Roshani's spiritual gift of cookies, and in later years through the intervention of my maternal grandfather, who actually forced my hand to sign a card. I believe if we examine how we become Baha'is, we'll find a unique set of circumstances that, like metaphorical stars, purposefully they were aligned to make it happen for us. I just hope that I can make something out of this gift and privilege. For the next few years, as my English got better, I systematically read, starting with Abdul Baha's talks and then his writings, because they were easier to understand, and then later tablets of Baha'u'llah. It wasn't until the 1990s that I started reading Shoghi Effendi in Melbourne. And I remember with Natalie and Dawood Mobini, we did a lot of that. It didn't even occur to me at the time to read these in Persian. I just waited so that my English was getting better. I was very keen to start my new life. That meant I had to learn English, I had to make new friends, I had to gain new experiences. There was no time to pause and read and learn about the faith in a language I knew. So my knowledge of the faith moved along with my skills in English and helped speed it up. For me, actually, reading the translations of Shoghi Effendi was an advantage in being able to help my understanding of the teachings. I entered University of New South Wales in 1986, and by 1989, I completed a Bachelor of Science with honors majoring in mathematics. I only did it because there was minimum English required. It wasn't the love of my life. During these years, I lived in Killara, Manly, and Randwick. Baha'i communities in Manly and Randwick were diverse in terms of age and country of origin. Baha'i activities and feasts were very relaxed, joyful, and warm. I really never forget the wonderful Baha'is I met there. They were all treated us university students as parents, as their own children. They were like parents for us. Living as a boarder in a house of one of my school friends or flatting with another university friend introduced me to different ways of living and interacting. I was eating and cooking non-Persian food. I was drinking coffee, and I was not speaking Farsi at home. I was really not attached to the Iranian culture, and I did not feel a need to assert my Persianness or speak my language in order to have a sense of home or self. In fact, I felt very betrayed by my country, and I was so grateful for Australia that I really wanted to be as quickly as possible and as Australian as possible, as much as possible. I had no experience of the Baha'i community in Iran. My only experience was just the larger Iranian community. Perhaps because of this, it was very easy for me to be open and make a home in the Australian society and let myself be embraced by the Australian Baha'i community as a friend and not as a stranger. Now, Aladdin might have lived in a pub, but I did go on a pub crawl with my friends. Really felt Australian, except that I had so much coke that day that I was much sicker than my friends. During the university, I was introduced to Baha'i studies. I think Kurosh talked about it last week. I became involved in the Baha'i Club at the university, which really was good because it provided a path of service while you're studying at university. And it was also very good because it assisted at my intellectual understanding of the faith. It opened up ways for us to be able to reach people of capacity on campus, where we could have speakers who came and spoke and related the teachings of the faith to issues in society. At the end of my last year, I also joined the Rainbow Dancers on a bus trip around northern New South Wales. This was a teaching troupe put together by Sue Podger and her son Dion. This was an amazing experience, short but really eye-opening. I got to see the rural Australia, visit Indigenous communities, and meet country believers who organized public performances and firesides. In 1989, I got a scholarship to do a PhD in mathematics, but that year I also had a job offer and a marriage proposal. So I declined the scholarship and accepted the job offer, married and moved to Melbourne. I feel extremely fortunate that I became part of the Hassell family, and they became part of mine. I met Graham only 3 years into being a Baha'i, and from the start up to this night, Graham has shown me the true meaning of accompaniment. In Melbourne, Graham and I, after consulting the RTC, settled in and helped form the LSA of Brunswick, which later became Moorland. This was a small inner city and multicultural community. We spent nearly 10 years there. And Andrew Straneri is here tonight, and he was in our community. During the Melbourne years, I went on my first pilgrimage, where I also met some of some Australian Baha'is in Haifa. We participated at the World Congress in New York in '92, and I also completed a PhD at University of Melbourne in the Department of Philosophy of Science. I was inspired by my stay in PNG in 1991, which I'll talk about later. In addition, during our Melbourne years, I participated in more activities in Baha'i studies. There were lots of ABS conferences those days, and they were well attended. They were huge, and we had a host of international speakers. I remember one in particular that was at the request of Dr. Naraghi, and on the Kitabe Aqdas, and that was done after the publication of it in English. It was also during the Melbourne years that Graham and I became involved with Education for Peace and the Certificate in Baha'i Studies at Yeranville. I see Anne Hinton is here. It was just wonderful to be with Anne and others during the summers. Professor Gulshah and Fazil Nafdi, they are a devoted, energetic, visionary, and extremely capable couple. They initiated these programs at Yeranville. And so Graham and I, and later Baby Hyde as well, we spend our summers, as I said, at Yeranville. It was really a privilege and a time of growth for us. It was wonderful to be able to see how these programs developed and changed and grew. It was wonderful to see the young people that attend these and meet them 30 years later, and see how wonderful they're doing in the Baha'i community or outside. It was also amazing to see the evolution of the approaches to and the methods of transformative education. This is all before Ruhi Institute. And we were really privileged to be working with people like John Davidson and Marjorie Tidman and the Nafnis, who were really specializing in this area. In 1991, Graham and I took a 12-month leave without pay, packed our house into a storage, and went to PNG for a year, where Graham was teaching history at the UPNG, and I picked up some tutoring in mathematics. The decision to do this, it was something that intuitively we arrived at when we heard about Graham's opportunity, just to be able to go there for a year. It was not a decision to pioneer as such, but merely just to walk through the doors that opened for us. Nevertheless, we saw ourselves as pioneers of some sort, so we studied the guidance on it. In 1991, by then I had been in Australia for 6 years, and I found it more useful to think of myself as a pioneer rather than migrant. In fact, Shoghi Effendi, as Elham Jamali also mentioned, wants us to think of ourselves as pioneers. In a letter on his behalf reads, he feels the Persians can render the utmost assistance to the teaching work wherever they settle, but they must go on the basis of pioneers and take up residence where they can render the best service to cause of God. So we can extend the definition of pioneer in that sense and say that wherever we go, if we can make sure that we can find a place where we can render the best service, then we can see ourselves as pioneers. In fact, Shoghi Effendi extends the definition of pioneer even more and talks about Baha'is pioneering different ways of teaching, different ways of doing things. And so that just seeing whatever we do in service to cause as pioneering. Now, of course, Shoghi Effendi says this, but it's not always easy to know where you can best render your service. But I don't think where is so much as important as how you render the service, how you live your life. And it's a balancing act to me to be able to be a migrant pioneer. At least I found it a balancing act. On the one hand, I'm visibly ethnic. Someone mentioned that to me when we were working with the Moorland Council. I was visibly ethnic. I was shocked. Oh, am I? I didn't realize that. I had not felt it, but it was how I'm perceived. And I do not want to be representing the Baha'i faith as an ethnic religious minority in Australia. But on the other hand, because of my visible ethnicity, as a Persian, it's easier to introduce the faith in conversations and teach. And it's much easier to also invite people to your home for dinner and make friends, which gradually may lead to firesides. So we use the opportunities that is afforded us as Persians. We teach whenever we can with our accents and olive skins. And at the same time, we try to avoid presenting the faith as something that is foreign. This was important to me because if you remember, I mentioned the makeup of the Australian community was a teacher for me. It sort of drove in the truth of Baha'u'llah, the fact that it's not just a Persian religion. So going back to this tension of pioneer and migrant that I felt, on the one hand, as a migrant, you sort of want to gravitate towards people who can understand you both in terms of language, but also those unspoken cultural nuances. But on the other hand, as pioneers, we are asked by Shoghi Effendi to acquire certain proficiency in the languages spoken and the knowledge of the custom of and the habits and the outlook of the people in the countries that we reside. This implies a certain kind of, or it requires us to assimilate, not to congregate with each other. Once at a Baha'i gathering, someone started talking to me in Persian and I answered in English. My understanding of cultural nuances told me that I was being disrespectful to the person addressing me because I answered back in English. Yet I was at a Baha'i gathering with the non-Persian believers around, and I would be disrespectful to them if I spoke in Farsi. So like I said, it's a balancing act of managing expectations. And this is something that I've felt a lot. And perhaps also because I'm in an intercultural marriage as well. So let's go back to PNG. We went there. It was an amazing experience, incredible experience. It was only 1 year, but it felt like 10. Not because it was bad, but because it was so packed with things. It was there that I met Cyrus and Mitra Naroghi and their children. Dr. Naroghi was a compassionate, humble, intelligent, joyful, and wise angel. He was able to genuinely relate to people from all walks of life. He confronted danger stoically, and there was danger in Papua New Guinea all the time. And he approached every endeavor of service to the faith with determination. To me, he seemed like to have a smile on his lips, but steel in his eyes. Soon after we arrived, Dr. Naroghi invited me to accompany a large group of Baha'is to visit some villages in the mountain-bound region. It was during the fast, and he said that we're all going to keep our fast, even though we're going to be walking 4 or 5 hours up the mountain in tropical heat. That's because we want the local villagers to see the importance of obedience to the laws of Baha'u'llah. During this year, Graham and I got a glimpse of the variety of ways the community served and grew. We saw the joy and vibrancy with which community of Port Moresby met on Sundays at Baha'i Center, the seriousness and the length of consultations at feast, and the depth of the faith and knowledge of the believers in remote villages, in addition to the tireless work done by the pioneers and travel teachers to be able to achieve this. There was also engagement with people of capacity. There were many Australian pioneers in PNG, and those who later settled in Australia, some via Mongolia. The Edwards, the Flobergs, Taids, Nadarajas, Baskaran, Lanes, Tilburys, Lings, Of course, Sister Bai and Jalal Mills. What we observed in them was constant, tireless, and courageous and selfless service, no matter how difficult the circumstances got. They were always so busy. In PNG, I also became interested in ways in which cultures can come together to create something new and better without one dominating the other. This was inspired by the concept of consultation in the Baha'i faith, but also what I observed in the pioneers, as well as my observations of the way PNG Baha'is navigated their own traditional culture, the modern introduced culture, and the Baha'i teachings. This was a theme that Dr. Narogli was very interested in. Back in Melbourne, I quit my job, got a scholarship, and started a PhD to explore these themes a bit more. This took me back to PNG in 1995 and 1996. In 2000, another door opened for us, and we packed and left for Switzerland to work at Landig International University. Landig, as some of you may know, is an independent, or was an independent, legally registered private university. They offered undergraduate bachelor degree as well as master level program in a number of fields. We were there for 3.5 years. It was a time of full-on activity. Landig was like a perpetual summer school. We ate together, worked together, socialized together. For an introvert person like me, it was like being thrown into the deep end of the pool. I was teaching sociology there and a few other subjects, and also administered education for peace over there during the summer holidays. Landig also hosted Baha'i Summer School, which brought a lot of participants from around Europe as well as amazing speakers. We were very happy to welcome some Aussie Baha'i visitors to Landig as well. Locally, we were in a Haydn Baha'i community, and we were able to, if I recall correctly, form the LSA there. Incidentally, the Swiss Baha'i community celebrated its 100th anniversary during our time there. I think it was celebrated at Landig. Sadly, the whirlwind that was Landig finished in December 2003, and by January 2004, we were in Fiji teaching at the University of South Pacific. We stayed in Fiji for 6 years. Really best decision of our lives. It was in Fiji that I started to participate in the Ruhi Institute. I think it was just starting to be introduced when we left Melbourne. In Landig, simply there was no time, and it was just a little bubble in a way. So we got on the LSA, and I realized that without any Ruhi training, I can't really be a pioneer. I'll be a very useless pioneer. So by the end of our stay, I was able to finish, do books 1 to 7. Briefly had a junior youth group with Hyde and some of his friends, as well as children classes with Thomas and some of his friends. In Suva, we met pioneers Ira and Satu Williams. Auntie Ira she recently passed away. She was a fierce teacher of the faith. She put me on my path of service in Fiji. She nominated me for the Secretary on Interfaith Search Fiji, which is an interfaith non-profit organization vital for a country with religious and racial tensions. This was a position I served in till we left, and I met just wonderful and sweet people there. Ira had introduced to Interfaith Search the concept of devotional gathering, where people don't talk and therefore get into arguments, but only share scripture on various themes. So a monthly devotions and dinner was instituted. I got to make some presentations while I was on Interfaith Search on the Baha'i faith, and one of them was memorable in the Catholic Church. It was memorable because the father who invited me was an amazing person who later went to serve in Afghanistan, and he died there. Excuse me. So after grooming me to replace her on Interfaith, Auntie Ira encouraged me to take over her as host of the weekly Baha'i program on Pacific Radio. This was a station that was managed by and operated at University of South Pacific. I had a lot of fun doing this program, and I made also many friends in the Pacific Radio community. One year to mark the observance of the birth of Baha'u'llah, Auntie Ira rang the office of the Vice President of Fiji, Ratu Joni. I won't say the last name, I can't pronounce it. And he wanted to invite him and and his wife to her place for dinner. Ratu Joni was quite familiar with the Baha'i teachings and the Baha'i community. But the Vice President's secretary heard Ira's invitation and said, after a pause, "You know Ratu Joni is very busy. He's a very busy person." And Auntie Ira says, "Yes, I know. That's why I'm calling you and not him." Thank you. Ratu Joni came to the dinner at Auntie and Uncle Sutter's humble apartment, together with his aide-de-camp, who stood in the background, attempting to look very formal but warming to a joyful occasion. This is how they were, fearless. Excuse me. As I said, going to Fiji was the best decision of our lives, because I also think of the effect this experience had on our sons, Hyde and Thomas. In January 2010, we moved to Wellington, New Zealand, where Graham obtained a position at Victoria University, and I as an online educational designer at Open Polytechnic. This was a field that I had come to enjoy at university in Suva, and I started a degree via distance in that field. The Baha'i community of Wellington was very small, or at least smaller and quieter than what we were used to in Suva. The pace of Wellington was slower, but it was very steady, really devoted Baha'is who were constant in their efforts. And there were activities on all fronts. I continued with Ruhi, but it was really the experience of the institute process I gained in Fiji, the observing of it and participating in it, that helped me understand and appreciate the power of the community building process, this power of community building. In Wellington, I served on the LSA for a while. I was a tutor. My favorite activity was tutor and children classes. And for a short time, also study circle coordinator, an assistant, and even ATC. It's a small community, so everybody gets to be on everything at some stage. The best part, as I said, was for me, the way the Ruhi Institute in building your capacity and then putting you on a path of service. It makes it systematic, and you're very clear. You're on the right track with the covenant. And so I enjoyed that. And I enjoyed children classes. And we had huge children classes with Rezwan Firestone. It grew and it changed as kids graduated and moved on to JY. It was really wonderful, mostly community of interest. So after 18 years of being away, we returned to Australia in 2018. We really did miss Australia. We did come every year to visit. We couldn't have stayed away from our family and our parents. And every time we came and we landed in Australia, we felt home. So we came to Gold Coast and I continuing with my Ruhi books and children classes. I picked up where I left in terms of where I finished in the sequence of books. Having unexpectedly arrived in our current location, how long we stay here, I don't know. We eagerly look forward to being able to have new opportunities to serve and grow. And that's, I think, what the key is. What Elham also mentioned about Shoghi Effendi's quote on pioneering, and it's something that also stayed with me all those years ago when I looked it up and read about pioneering, that no matter where you are, make sure that you are there to give your best and serve and do whatever is in front of you with constant efforts. Now in Gold Coast, I'm not a minority anymore, and that's another change for me, to be amongst the Persian Baha'i community here as well. And I must admit, I enjoy it because I didn't get that before. So that's all I have to say. I hope that it was of some interest to you. I feel like I've had a wonderful, extraordinary life. I just can't remember it. So you got the outline. Thank you.
Thank you, Kati. That was splendid, and I look forward to seeing whether there are any questions for you in the time that we have remaining. So if anybody would like to direct some questions to Kati about her story.
Have any connection with Muslim relatives that she had? And has she been able to teach them at all?
No, well, I think, Mariam, are you still online? I've got one here, I think, but I don't know.
Hello.
There you go.
Hello, Mariam. Mariam, can we see you? And I don't know if you can put your camera on and say where you're living and maybe tell us something about Kati. I don't want to embarrass you, but it'd be lovely to hear from you.
Hi. I live in Germany, and even Kati is actually my age, and we lived in Tehran and Iran a few years at the same time. We have never met in Iran. So I met her first time in Australia about a year ago, and I am really very happy to have done this journey to meet her. I gained a friend, and I thought, my God, we were so close, and we meet each other now. You know, but even so, I'm very glad I get to know her. And I thank you for this very beautiful, nice, wonderful talk, Khadija. I love it. And I love you.
Thank you. So Mariam has been sometimes, once in a while, coming and joining various things. I think for the holiday she came. But in terms of speaking to my other relatives, we were not always, even in Iran, I didn't really see my relatives often. We were moving from city to city. My cousin, who was not a Baha'i also, because his father was not, when he was in Iran, he was taught the faith by his younger cousins. And he did the Ruhi, and he just recently signed the card here in Australia. So we'll see. Yeah. So I hope that answers your question. I don't, yeah.
Thank you, Ahmad, for that great question. And it's so great that Mariam is online. I don't know what time it is in Germany, but that's been special to have you online. Thank you, Mariam, for that.
That's 11:20 in the morning.
Oh, easy, easy, easy. Now, Katie referred to a number of other people in her presentation. She mentioned Anne Hinton, and I see that Silan's online, Tahir's online. I see Elham and Mariam are online as well. Elham and Miguel online.
Even Andrew, maybe from Melbourne, Moreland Days. And Becky is here. Hey, Becky.
Well. So it's over to you if you have any questions for Katie.
Hi, Katie.
Hey. Oh my God.
A long time no see you already. So emotional to see you again.
I should have put a photo of you.
No. Very nice talk. Very nice presentation. I enjoy it very much. Yeah.
Can I make a comment, Graham?
Yes, Andrew, please.
Thank you very much, Kathy. Now, Kathy was the first Baha'i I met in Australia, and I was I had come across the Baha'i faith on a trip in India, and returned to Australia, and with some nervousness after a little while, I thought I'll see if I can reach out to the community, the Baha'i community, and if anyone is in that sort of situation, you might go through the things I went through. You're sort of a little bit nervous because you think, and I had been exploring so many different religions and faiths and stuff, and you do get a little bit nervous because you might, in that first encounter, run into a fire and brimstone kind of reaction, or a judgmental reaction, or a belittling reaction and stuff like that. Now, when I first met Kathy to find out more about the faith, I got none of that. And I felt that I was already part of a big family, and a respectful caring for my journey, and it was just so moving, and it gave me, just a hint of the Baha'i faith, that if it was really like this across the community and across the nation and across the world, gee, we're in for a nice ride here. And I think, and it has been like that, and I thank Kathy very much from that moment.
Thank you, Andrew, for that. Friends, we've got just a few more minutes together online, and your opportunity to share.
Andrew, my wife would like to say a few things.
Please go ahead.
Thank you so much. I want to thank everyone for the beautiful speeches they've given. And I'm very blessed to know both Graham's family and Kathy's family. They were beautiful. Your parents were just beautiful, both from both sides. And when I saw Satu and Iran Williams thing, I thought it was so beautiful to see their photographs again, because they were quite, we knew them quite well, and then they helped us a lot when we were in a lot of difficulty when a child was dying. So they're just beautiful souls and beautiful examples as Baha'is, and especially your mother and your grandmother and all who I knew so well, and grandfather. They were just beautiful examples of what Baha'is can be. So thank you so much. It was a pleasure listening to your stories.
And Kathy, can I make a request? That photograph of the Balcombe Hills community, is it possible to get a copy of that? Because when I looked at it, I saw our whole family over there with the kids, so small, because it was just a year up that we came to Australia. And I think that was taken in 1989 or so. So
Yeah.
I would love to get a copy of that, please.
I'm happy to do that. When I quickly used my camera, I don't think it was a scan, and so some Peregrine Khanum Martin is missing. That photo is the only one I could find, and I'm happy to scan it and send it via gram to you. It's a photo of Balcombe Hills, but it's a time where I wasn't there anymore. My mother was there. My grandfather is not there, so he's passed away, obviously, then. My grandmother was there. So yes, it's a slightly different composition to when I was there. But that's the only one I could find.
It's the most beautiful photograph. Thank you very much, Katie. Appreciate that.
Thank you, friends. Maybe just one or two last comments or questions before we finish our session. Any of the Randwick friends? The Melbourne friends? Ovid?
Kathy, I take issue with one comment that you had, that you didn't read The Guardian's writings until the 90s. I remember you being a very active participant in studying The Guardian's writings at the Hassells when all the students came together in the 80s. And you were very erudite and very learned in your commentary. But I've got a question for you, Kathy. Your grandfather, he had a presence about him. He looked to be quite a distinguished person. From the time in Iran, was he a well-known Baha'i, or was he looked to have a great presence about him? I can remember in Yeranbul, people like Peter Khan and Frank Khan would always go and talk to him. He was an interesting man from what I saw.
My grandfather, you met him, I didn't know. For one thing, I told you my memory is not good. I only remember reading Shoghi Effendi in Melbourne with Natalie and Graham and a few others. But if I've done it, fine. I didn't realize I was as good as that, as early as that. But my granddad, I don't know much. What I do know is that he was from, his mother was a very prominent Baha'i family from the Jewish background. And he grew up as a Baha'i child and a young Baha'i. My uncle was telling me stories, that's my maternal, my mother's brother, that granddad one time mentioned somebody, and my uncle was not a Baha'i at the time, didn't know who's who, but somebody who had become a member of the Universal House of Justice, and said, hey, I used to go travel teaching with this person. And so my granddad grew up quite strong. And the way he was saying it, he says, look where he's gone and look what happens to me, what happened to me. So he did lose his way for a while. So all through the time since I was born, and even before, when he married my grandmother, he had lost his voting rights, and it was instituted back again in US when he was in San Diego, and they only went because my grandmother's friends who were Baha'i said, look, we were told by the House of Justice to leave, and so my grandmother wanted to listen and obey. So, so first, she went and got everything sorted, and then my granddad moved, and the Baha'is in San Diego were the ones who sort of encouraged him to go back. Yeah. So, yeah, his father had left them when he was young. So whether he was a Baha'i or not, I don't know, but he left them and he went to Israel, Palestine at the time.
Well, it's time for us to bring the session to an end. I want to thank our presenters tonight for such a stimulating session. Thank you so much to Kathy and to Aladdin and to Elham for your presentations tonight. We thank you very, very much.
Thank you for the opportunity.